was hot
I
today.
bet that's hot.
It was real hot, and I was real confused why I was sweating at my desk so bad, and it turned out that it was still on heat.
When you go from winter to summer with entirely skipping spring, it's kind of a challenge.
Well, yeah, when you go from a warm winter day to a hot summer day in the span of 2 days, it's really easy to forget.
And you get the humidity to boot.
It's really easy to forget to flip the HVAC to cool. But we're here, and it's nice and cool in the office. But what's up, everybody? Corey Singletary here with the Citizens Utility Board, and with me, as always,
Tom Content.
Tom Content, our Executive Director. And we thought today, for another episode of CUB Tracks, we would maybe take a step back and talk about ourselves a little bit, pat ourselves in the back, or flip through the history book a little bit. But before we get to that, for folks, who are watching on YouTube, it would be great if you took a second and hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. It really actually does help with the algorithm. Or if you're listening to the podcast, make certain you're subscribed so you get any future episodes, and don't miss any news or fun banter that we have here. But I guess I'll kick it over to you with this question. Why do Wisconsin utility customers need us? Why do they need CUB?
Who the heck are we, and why do they need us? And basically, the short answer is there's nobody else doing that, and that's kind of the void that Ralph Nader sought to fill back in the day, back in the 70s. He wrote a column in a Washington newspaper that basically dreamed up this idea. He called it a Residential Utility Consumer Action Group, a RUCAG. And he brought that to Wisconsin.
Sexy.
Isn't that something? So we could be Wisconsin RUCAG, but luckily we're not. So the Wisconsin leaders, Jim Wehner and others in the legislature at the time, took that idea and created the idea of a Citizens Utility Board. So we're the first in the nation. And so the idea is it's all about leveling the playing field. The utilities have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence. They have political power. And so do some of the moneyed interests, the big businesses. So who wasn't at the table? And what Nader saw was that the average person, the little guy, wasn't at the table. So CUB was formed to represent the little guy, the consumer, the homeowner, the renter, and we've broadened that to include small business. But that's how we came to be.
Yeah, and I think maybe people don't. I mean, for those that are aware of who we are, they may not be aware of kind of, I guess, how young an organization CUB is. I mean, CUB turns 42 this year, if I'm doing my math right, because I turned... No, CUB 43 this year.
Yeah, we just turned 42.
We turned 43 this November. Thanksgiving 1979 is when CUB was born through an act of the legislature. And if you look back, I mean, the statute's still there, the Citizens Utility Board statute, and was on the Wisconsin state law, and we're created to look at, to advocate on behalf of residential customers and farm customers at the time.
That's true.
And as you pointed out, we expanded the farm under. Farm now lives under sort of the small business umbrella for us. But it hasn't always been this way for Wisconsin customers, and it is about that sort of balance of power that you're talking about, right? The utilities have a lot of money, and when they come before the regulator and ask, make their case, even today, it can feel daunting. But I can't imagine what it might have been, 4 decades ago, when there was basically nothing.
Well, and they operated under a system with no CUB for 70 years or so in the monopoly system, and certainly when they come, even today, they come with no shortage of experts that they're paying to convey their positions in every case. Mm-hmm. And so we hire experts. The old model was CUB would hire industry experts from around the country. The new model is we pay you, and we pay you and Steve to be our experts. We can still tap national experts as needed, depending on the case. But it's interesting how the system how our role has changed, and I think it's important to think about not just what our role is, or how Wisconsin does it. Wisconsin does it with a CUB, but most states actually use an attorney general's office for this function. In fact, all the states that surround Wisconsin have an attorney general's office that, or a unit within state government that has the advocacy role on behalf of residential customers. The interesting thing about all the surrounding states is they also have CUBs. So we don't have the attorney general's office, but we do have CUB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's maybe the best comparison or best analogy is lobbying, right? Most people are familiar with the concept of lobbying, of organizations, companies, individuals who want the government to do certain things, go before their elected officials and make the case, right?
Right.
And people are familiar with lobbyists and are familiar with sort of that notion that money drives that. But really on the regulation side, it's not that dissimilar, right? The utilities have folks that go out and advocate on behalf of the utility, that try to make the utility's case, before the PSC, before the regulator. That's more of a formal process. But there are still things like going and having the meetings with people that you need to meet, showing up to proceedings. You talked about expert witnesses and being able to provide expert witness testimony. And the utilities have all those resources, but what a lot of folks may not know or may suspect is that utility ratepayers actually fund the utilities' activities to engage in this effectively lobbying before the regulator. And depending on how you view what the utility is doing, right, one may feel like the utilities are taking customer money to advocate for things that maybe aren't what customers want, which is, why things like organizations like ours, why offices like Office of Consumer Advocate in Iowa, or the various analogs throughout the country are important. Because without, someone to sort of focus the interest of the consumers before the regulator, it's very easy to just only see what the utility's bringing forward. Right.
Well, and then just, I use the old line that goes back to my journalism days, which is follow the money, right? I mean, you see where the financial incentives, how the financial incentives are set up. And in our industry, in this industry, you build more in order to grow your earnings if you're a utility, if you're an investor-owned utility, but who's paying for that? Who's paying for that growth? It's the customers. So that's why a balance is needed in this decision making that happens. And frankly, even with the additional funding that we've gotten thanks to the unanimous decision of the legislature, CUB is still outspent. You mentioned that their ratepayer dollars are being spent. I think you did the analysis that it was that the utilities were spending $4 to $5 million a year just on their advocacy at the PSC.
Yeah, their regulatory expense average somewhere around we'll call it $4 million. I'll be charitable there. I'll use the low end there, but yeah, it was about $4 million to pay for their staff time, for their attorneys, for their experts, to engage in regulatory activities, right? So those are the things that they specifically identify as regulatory expenses. But
that's apart from what they're spending on lobbying for the legislature.
That's apart from
campaign finance and all the rest.
That's apart from actual lobbying,
right? Exactly.
Which is a whole other thing. But mercifully, with respect to rates, that's not paid for. Lobbying is not paid for by ratepayers. That is excluded from rates. So
correct.
And that's where it is interesting. In terms of how regulatory activities get paid for at the utility. I think another reason why in this industry where you have a regulated monopoly, right, that having a consumer advocate or really any of the ratepayer the ratepayer advocate organizations that do come before the regulator regularly. We have a counterpart on the large industrial side, right?
Right.
Most states do. And there may be other variations that represent other, blocks of utility customers. But you mentioned, technical experts, and really all these sort of regulated proceedings, these questions before the commission of how high should the rates be, what program should utilities have, they be investing more in energy efficiency or different types of generation,
incentives for rooftop solar.
Yeah, incentives for rooftop solar or EV charging programs. All of these are highly technical issues, right? So under Wisconsin law, and I think the law of virtually every state with a more traditional utility industry, there's some opportunity for members of the public or in particular customers of the utility to be heard, right? There's an ability for folks to put in comments and that kind of thing. But because the regulator ultimately at the end of the day has to make a technical decision rooted in the law, it's not enough for just individuals like you and I to go before the regulator and say the rates are just too damn high, right? That doesn't pass muster in terms of the type of evidence that the regulators need to make a decision. So you really need to be able to bring to the table expert witnesses, folks who do have expertise in various fields. Myself, I know rates, I know cost allocation, I know a lot about a lot of things, but we have folks like Steve, who's an expert in utility finance and return on equity.
Yep.
And we have, to your point, at various points, retained outside experts from national consulting firms, and that costs a lot of money, especially consulting, especially the consultants.
Right.
And that's just not that's too heavy a lift for individuals. It's too heavy a lift even for a highly motivated set of individuals. I think the bill for consulting fees for these technical experts would cause people's eyes to water if they knew how much it was.
No, it's more economical for everyone that we have you and Steve on staff rather than just relying on consultants.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned that. So expensive.
Yeah, I was actually talking with a colleague of mine from an area nonprofit or a statewide nonprofit who does work before the commission. I'm not going to mention names, but they were talking to me about with some of the work that they're doing, that they're the meter's running for them for consultant fees and attorneys fees, and I got the sense that there's a little bit of a tension in trying to get things done, Like let's not drag this out too long,
right?
Because it costs more. But at the same time, there may be instances where taking time makes sense, and you
don't want to make hasty decisions either.
Yeah,
right?
you don't want to make hasty decisions, but I think you hit it right on the head. It's like follow the money, and as with everything, unfortunately, or a lot of things, money makes things happen, and so not only the organizations like ours, like the state consumer advocate offices, sort of signal boost the more literal voice of the customer, but it also allows for more concentrated effort, that pooling of resources, as it were, to bring to the table all of the expertise needed, all of the testimony, all of the technical aspects and requirements to advocate on behalf of those customers.
Right. On issues where we're aligned, we've partnered with, as an example, the industrial, the large customer group jointly funding experts, for instance, on whether it's, how to deal with these, how much customers should have to bear for coal plant costs after those plants shut down. That's an example.
Yeah, and it may be surprising to some, or maybe it's not, but on most issues, we actually, the little guy actually does agree with the large corporations, mostly because our interest is trying to keep overall cost as low as possible. The part where we end up, taking knives to each other is when once the size of the pie is decided is
then you got to slice it up.
Then we got to slice it up, and we obviously don't agree on how big each person's slice should be.
Yeah, we shouldn't get a big slice of the pie, right?
No, we should get a fair slice of the pie. And equity and fairness is something that we can talk about another time, because that's a whole other thing.
Well, and I think that is important, though. You talked about how the average rate, the commission doesn't want to hear just somebody standing up and down saying my rates are too high. But yet at the same time, there is a lot more focus on equity and energy burden today than there was 2 to 4 to 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think there will be, a place for people who have high energy burdens to use their voice at the commission.
Yeah, it's the part that is going to be the challenge for us, where we live at that intersection of what people need, and then sort of navigating the regulatory process. Is how do we take that sentiment, right? That actual real on the ground need for equity in, utility rates, affordability, and actually turn it into something that works from in a numbers sense, because we've talked about it before, and I will always take an opportunity to pat my own back. But I've been working on with folks, my former colleagues at the commission, on energy burden. What's sort of the hot topic right now of energy burden. I've been talking with folks about this for 7 years, and I'm not going to lie. I will obviously say, I will 100% say that I did not come up with the idea. Folks before all of the people who are talking about it now, we're talking about it. Folks at the national labs were talking about energy burden. But anyway, that's come to the fore, and everyone's talking about energy burden. Everyone's like, this is really important.
But what are we going to do about it?
Exactly. That's the hard part, right? I think as an industry, we now have a lot of folks. We have more people at the table, which is good. More organizations, in addition to organizations like us, talking about issues, and that can only bring good things, because it does help, again, amplify the voice of the consumer. But we're sort of, I think, some of the folks that are new to the arena are at the point where they're kind of like individuals, where they're saying the energy burden is too high. The rates are too damn high, but what do we do from there? And that's gonna take everyone.
And I think that's one of the important roles that CUB can play, is help to demystify some of this stuff. I think that's why CUB Tracks is going to be a tool for that, is to try to, like it or not, there's just too much friggin' jargon in this industry, and it is technical, but to actually give people a voice and to actually care about their voices, you have to make it so that I can understand it. And I came to this as a layman, as a journalist covering this stuff, and if I need to understand it, the average person needs to understand it, and so we want to cut through the jargon and kind of demystify some of this stuff.
Well, it's definitely a long-term project, and it's an eternal project as long as we continue to have utility regulation. But we thank folks that follow along and listen and watch us talk about this, and hope that people find it valuable, and that they share this information with other people, because as much as we just said that it's not enough for people to have their individual voices heard, it is still important, and I think it is actually it's critical, primarily because people historically haven't been involved individually. And right. I think the commission needs to hear both. They need to kind of be able to take the temperature of the customers directly, and then they need to be able to then look at the technical evidence and say, how can I come up with a way to respond to this stated need from the masses? Exactly. And we hope that folks will join us for the ride.
That's right. And before we go, I wanted to give a plug for our upcoming webinar and this is for more geared toward the small business community, but there's information on LinkedIn, and we'll put it in the show notes, I guess, like a link or something.
Yeah, for folks that are watching on YouTube, we'll put the link down in the description.
So we got a small business webinar coming up on May 18th, noon to 1. We've got CUB and Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, Be Local Wisconsin, and the Sustainable Business Council all participating. So trying different ways to get the word out on energy trends and energy costs. The CUB Tracks is one of them. Webinars are another. So,
and without spoiling it, was there anything? What in particular should people what's the elevator pitch? Why should people sign up for their webinar?
Well, for small business, we're really talking about tools. Tools. It's getting the lay of the land of some of the complex issues going on with utility rates and regulation, but then also it's about tools. The Green Masters program from the Sustainable Business Council has a tool. Focus on Energy has a business tool right on their website where you can do an assessment. And then Be Local Wisconsin has tools that are linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we'll have speakers that talk about all those things. So it's actually going to be pretty useful stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Tom. And I hope your tires don't melt to the road on the drive back to Milwaukee.
Yeah, it's I'm not a big fan of summer in May. I'd like to leave summer to like July and August.
Yeah,
but I'm glad I live cooler by the lake. Cooler by the lake, at least not right on the lake, but close enough where it's not this hot there today.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go turn the AC back on now. So. Cool. Thanks.